Hi, my name is Rutendo Nyamuda, and welcome to another phenomenal episode of In My 20s. In my 20s. So on today's episode of the In My 20s podcast, we do ask that you put all prior prejudices aside and listen with an open heart and an open mind as we engage in a conversation on xenophobia. So welcoming our guest onto the In My 20s podcast and into the In My 20s family, here she is.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Sibanda. I am a legal professional who specializes in the Constitution. I am also a wine blogger and a wine enthusiast. I like to read and sleep on my weekends, but because I'm a liker of things, I often get launched and I go.
Now, on every episode of the In My 20s podcast, my guests always come through with these incredible mind moments or gem moments, and this is just one of them.
What xenophobia does is that it requires me to perform my humanity for people. I shouldn't have to wake up every day and prove I'm worth living. So the performance that is required to get a person to understand that it's such a hard thing to have to do.
The In My 20s podcast is split up into 3 sections. In the first section, we get to hear a little bit more about Rebecca's career journey. In the second section, we dive into today's topic, which is all about xenophobia. And then rounding up all 3 sections is a conversation on the all-consuming 20s journey. So without further delay, let's get straight into it. So Rebecca, tell us a little bit about your career history. How did you get to where you are and what are you currently doing?
Okay, so I have a master's in international law, specializing in human rights and human rights protection. During the last year of my master's, I got an internship at the Center for Constitutional Rights, and I just never left. I am currently the legal officer there, and my work basically involves promoting and protecting the Constitution, mostly through legislative changes and calling out individuals who are responsible for some of the damage that we see in people's lives.
But take us a little bit back. So, you are originally from Zim, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I am born and raised. I was raised in Zim's second largest city, Bulawayo, Ndebele girl. So I went to school at Girls College. Best years of my life, to date. I wish, a lot of people hate their high school years.
Yeah.
I had the best time.
Yeah.
All girls school, just super supportive, really helped hone my character and, what I was good at. I really enjoyed that. So obviously 2008 happened in Zim and I'd actually planned to go to uni in 2009. And then I had my older brother who was in college and my parents were like, we can't afford to have both of you in university right now. So I spent gap year working for my dad, saving my money, and I paid for my own tuition for my first year all by myself.
Oh, wow. Yeah. You say 2008 happened in Zim. What exactly happened? Not a lot of people are well-versed in what happened in Zim. So what happened in 2008?
So 2008 was the biggest economic dip in Zimbabwe. Currency changes, so the Zim dollar just lost its value, and a lot of changes happened in terms of political unrest and the economy as well, which meant a lot of people lost their pensions and their savings. Poorer people definitely didn't have access to basic services. They couldn't buy food, access to medical services. A whole lot of things went bad. And as a result, I think it stunted the growth of a lot of individuals, especially my generation, in terms of access to education and employment. And when I compare and contrast with people who didn't manage to leave Zim, who are my age, our lives are in very different spaces. So I acknowledge my privilege very much in that I had the option of working for a bit and then going further into, university. But there's a lot of lives that pinpoint that year as the worst year because of what it meant going forward. So economic changes and the political unrest that took place in Zim in 2008 are definitely a defining moment for a lot of lives. And definitely not just for people who are my age, but for my parents. They lost their pensions. So my dad is currently turning 60 and he's still working. He should be living his best life. Yeah. Just, watching his grandkids grow and holidaying. But him and my mother are running a business and consistently trying to find other, ways to make money.
You said lost your pension because the idea and understanding is of having a pension or having a savings is something that you're built up to. How does one just lose their pension?
So because of the devaluation of the Zim dollar, banks literally zeroed accounts. pension funds, provident funds, they literally zeroed because the Zim dollar wasn't worth anything anymore. So they canceled it. So if you had X amount of savings either in like actual money in your bank account or in a pension fund somewhere, it meant it wasn't worth anything. So you couldn't tap into those funds because they didn't exist anymore. Literally, some banks sent, like a lot of banks actually sent messages saying, hi, there's nothing in your account anymore. We're starting from scratch.
Sure.
So can you imagine somebody who has been living off their pension for X years suddenly going to the bank and being unable to withdraw that money? That person who doesn't have anybody remitting money to them from overseas, as a lot of people ended up doing, who relies solely on that money, they had no access to it anymore.
Yeah.
And what I really want people to understand is that it literally meant somebody had no food that night and for many nights going forward. Literally. They couldn't pay their rates, so they got water cut off because the city council still wanted the money. They couldn't pay for power, which already is a big thing in Zimbabwe. Power cuts are part of life.
Yeah.
But now even the little that I was getting, now I can't even afford to pay for that. You know, so day-to-day life really altered in that period. And nothing has really been the same since.
So, Rebecca, to start off, how do you define the next four following terms? So, refugee, foreigners, expats, and migrants.
Okay, so the first one is refugees. So legally, there's a system in place that identifies individuals as refugees. So the fundamental requirement is that you must be fleeing from some form of persecution. Either it be political, because of your origin, because of your sexual orientation. So international instruments and South African instruments stipulate what the criteria is. And if you meet that criteria, you apply through the asylum system in South Africa and you either get accepted or not. And if you're accepted, you are called a refugee.
Okay.
And you have the papers that say you're a refugee. And being a refugee is literally just a title. In South Africa, it's incredible because a refugee has the same access to basic services that a South African has. You literally become part of the framework, part of the system. You can access medical, safety and security, school, employment, because you are recognized as a South African on paper.
So second definition is a foreigner.
Okay, a foreigner across the board is a person who is not from the place that they either exist or occupy, right? So if you don't come from South Africa, but you live in South Africa or you're visiting South Africa for whatever purpose, you are a foreigner. But we also know that connotations and perceptions are even more important. So the paper that says foreigner doesn't mean as much as how I'm perceived as a foreigner. So
third one is expat.
I hate that word. I hate it, like with the core of my being. I hate it.
Yeah.
Because expats are treated like special foreigners.
Yes.
They are allowed to create communities.
Yeah.
So you're not from a country, but you have been able to create a community of people who look like you, sound like you, share history, share experiences with you. So you find comfort in a place where ideally you shouldn't. So, and expats could mean somebody who's been there for 2 months to somebody who's been there for 20 years.
Okay.
So it's an interesting idea to me to feel safe in a country that isn't yours, or safer than people from a country in a country that isn't yours, which is often the case. If you look at the South African communities in, for example, Kenya, in Uganda, in Namibia, it's very comfortable.
Yes.
But then that also speaks to privilege. The color of your skin is important because expats aren't, in the South African context, are rarely Black people, rarely people of color.
And then fourth one is a migrant.
A migrant, okay. In international law, we speak of migrants as people who leave their place of origin, not necessarily country, but place of origin, to go and seek better pastures, often like economic. So we speak of economic migrants. That's the prefix. People who, for whatever reason, cannot find or sustain their livelihoods where they come from, so they leave to another place to attempt to better their economic situation. So in the international law space, we also talk about migrants who are economic, who cross borders. So you can say a refugee, right? And people sometimes interchange refugee and migrant, but they're not the same thing.
Okay.
A refugee is fleeing persecution. An economic migrant is literally seeking money and the security that money affords.
Okay. So the reason I asked specifically and started off asking what those terms and definitions meant is because of something you said, connotations.
Yeah.
The way you inform them, or the way you speak about migrants, refugees, expats, foreigners, in various contexts, what frustrates me most about the way it's used in South Africa is the context and the connotations to it. So we talk about expats when we talk about people who are white. We talk about white people. We talk about Europeans. We talk about people from the US.
Yes.
Every single one of the other three, refugees, a migrant, or a foreigner, refers to a person of color, refers to a black person, refers to another African. And that for me has always been uncomfortable. It's like, why can't you just because it also gives you a mindset. It's like, oh, an expat is coming to, it's like that superiority mindset.
Absolutely.
Where there's an inferiority or a lesser kind of connotation placed on refugee, migrant, or foreigner.
Absolutely. And when you speak of expats versus the other groups, there's definitely the layer of colorism, definitely the layer of Eurocentrism, there's the layer of money, right? Because of the systemic and systematic exclusion of people of color across the world, you have certain groups of people who will always have access or be given access based purely on the color of their skin. And you can't have the conversation about expat versus others without acknowledging the legacy of colonialism and imperialism across the world. So even today, we are living in a country that is not so far away from apartheid and the impact of it. The remnants are still flowing through people's lives, and language that was used in apartheid and how we identify certain groups of people is still very, very prevalent. So expats are treated differently, and it's primarily because of the color of their skin. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And we can sugarcoat it and be like, no. But the truth is that when you strip away all the layers, it's definitely about the color of their skin. And Africans have been viewed as being dirty, as bringing disease, as hoarding resources, as competition.
Yes.
So a black South African will not see a white foreigner as competition, but they will see a black foreigner as competition. And it's so baffling, because then it means that you think all black people's stories are the same, and that's dangerous. Because, for example, myself, I have privilege that perhaps a white person from Europe has. The competition on this, it's not there, it's not the same, right? But the moment I state that I'm Zimbabwean, it's like, hold up. The reception changes.
Yes.
You know? But you don't know what I had to go through to get here. It's a whole different thing. People afford patience and an ear to white foreigners that they have none to give to people of color. So
that's so true.
And fighting looks different now. It looks like state capture. It looks like siphoning of funds. It looks like excluding people from systems of power, of access. So migration is not a new concept. And then if you think about in the South African context as well, during apartheid, the migration of the armed wings of political parties to different parts of Africa for training, for safety and security during exile, all those conversations need to be had. Because you have to understand that it's not a tit for tat situation per se, but understanding history makes you more empathetic and understanding of what lived experiences are and what they mean for people. So there's a lot of conversation about how these people are coming into our country to take our things. But look beyond that and understand that those countries harbored your people in the most traumatic time in your history. And I think when you understand and you allow yourself to interrogate who told you that foreigners are bad, then you can kind of start developing a different understanding of migration and foreigners and people who are here, not because they want to be, but because life has dealt them a certain card.
Yeah, a lot of people do think the reason why people from different African countries are in South Africa is because they're just coming. They're coming to take their jobs or coming to take their resources or whatever it is. But what you've just painted now is the reasons why people are here. Even coming back to some of those definitions, you're running away from either war. You're running away from famine. You're running away from crime, violence in your own.
Yes.
Can you imagine living in your household and having consistent gunfights and violence outside your house? You're trying to protect your family.
That is so interesting.
I'm not in the areas or the places where xenophobic attacks are high, but as a Zimbabwean-born woman living in South Africa, I'm affected because I'm like, those are my people. Whether it's Zimbabwean or Zambian or Nigerian or doesn't matter where you're from, the minute I hear foreigners were attacked, foreigners have been burned.
Absolutely.
I get so emotional and so angry because I'm like, that could have been me. That could have been my family.
You know, I get very frustrated because what xenophobia does is that it requires me to perform my humanity for people. I shouldn't have to wake up every day and prove I'm worth living.
Sure.
So the performance that is required to get a person to understand that ningumuntu nam, it's such a hard thing to have to do. And then to think about the fact that someone else didn't even have the opportunity to perform their humanity and their life was taken anyway. So yeah, it's a very, it's heartbreaking. Because sometimes you don't even know whose life was taken, and it could be a relative. You could hear months later or weeks later, so-and-so was involved. It's difficult, you know?
How do you define xenophobia?
Oh, okay. So for me, I mean, the standard definition is the fear of foreigners, humans. But so it's not just the fear or the hatred, it's the systematic exclusion of people because of where they come from, which is a constitutional ground. You cannot discriminate unfairly against a person based on their place of origin. So you have this legislation that is so mindful of the fact that migration is a thing and that South Africa is a melting pot of people from different places. So it envisages a place where these people can come in and be accommodated and integrated. But on the ground, because we don't teach our children in schools or educate people about what it means to be a foreigner, what foreigners symbolize, that they're just people. Like, there's definitely a disconnect because people just hear the word foreign and it's a trigger word. So you don't understand that because someone or something is foreign, it's not a threat. So xenophobia for me is bigger than just about the fear or hatred. It's about how it manifests itself.
We see a lot of xenophobic attacks happening in more lower income areas as opposed to middle class and upper income areas or higher earning areas. Why is that?
One, I think because we have the luxury of using this kind of English to eloquently address our problems. Because we have this quote-unquote intelligence. It's a luxury to sit in the burbs or in the city and have a conversation about what xenophobia means. When I'm living in squalor and I am hungry and I don't have a job and my options are limited if they exist at all. And then I see the slight, like what you said earlier, that I perceive that person who's not from here to be doing better than me. And because my language is violence, that's it. That's the end of the conversation. They don't have the luxury to say, let's meet in the city hall and let's have a chat about theories of xenophobia and theories of migration. They don't have that luxury. They're hungry right now. They don't have food right now. But you're driving your car through my neighborhood to go live in the house that may be an RDP house that I think I have a right to. So inequality definitely pushes people to respond violently because they don't feel like they have options. And then somebody who is perceived as a threat looks more secure, looks more comfortable. I'm going to knee-jerk reaction with the language that I know to address it. It's not going to solve anything for me because if I kill that person from Mozambique, I'm not going to be hiding their position immediately. That's not what it means.
So in your work, in your line of work, working on a lot of human rights law and in that space, how do we fix this? Because obviously, like you're saying, we can have this conversation here. We can have it on a podcast and we'll probably be speaking to the converted anyway.
Absolutely.
So the people who, they're just like, they'll agree with everything. How do we get these kinds of conversations and how do we inspire these conversations in the lower income areas where they should be having the conversations or where we should have leadership, not just talking in newspapers or in interviews of how we need to stand together and fight against xenophobia, but actually doing something that we're implementing in those areas and in those communities. So how do we get these conversations into the places where they need to be?
I think one thing you touched on that's really fundamental is leadership. So this kind of conversation has to trickle from the top down. And when you don't have political will to see change, it's not going to happen, right? So, for example, and I have a very, he's a thorn in my side. So Herman Mashaba, for example, who consistently spews xenophobic vitriol in the newspapers, at rallies, consistently uses a language of hatred against people who are not South African. He has access to so many ears And that influence, and people don't understand how strong that influence is. When you see your political leader feeling a certain way, you're going to co-opt that feeling and you're going to act on it. Herman is done when he puts the microphone down and he goes back to his luxurious house after driving in his air-conditioned car. He's fine. But the people who he leaves with that unrest will go into their communities and do what they do, right? So definitely leadership has to inculcate a spirit of Ubuntu in people to allow the next step, which I think is the most important, community mobilization. And I'm a legal person, and I, for the longest time, really believed in how the law changes lives until I realized that it's a piece of paper. The people who have to and live that law are human beings who are part of communities, who go to church, who are at schools, all of those things, right? And communities are the stronghold of any thinking. So if your preacher is xenophobic, that church becomes xenophobic. That church has individuals who go into their neighborhoods and become xenophobic, and it spirals out of control. So definitely community mobilization, having conversations.
In and among the gender-based violence stories that have surfaced, one of the big things was the xenophobic attacks.
Yeah.
What were your feelings and emotions when the news of the xenophobic attacks had come up again these last couple of weeks?
I have family in Joburg, so my first instinct was to call my loved ones and say, hey, are you okay? This is what's happening. Don't go outside. Right? My first instinct. The second is how you noted a lack of police presence as that crowd moved through the city, right? And it's understanding, or the perception, that because the lives that were at risk were not South African lives, they didn't matter. That hurt. Right? Because the Constitution and the police policy and the Police Service Act don't say you must protect only citizens. It says occupants, people who live here, So definitely knowing that even the systems and the institutions of power don't care was scary, right? And then I think follow up to that was how, for example, the police minister refused to identify it as xenophobic violence. He said criminality. He even said it's not xenophobia. Again, leadership doesn't want to call the thing the thing. And if you can't call the thing, how do you address the thing? If I say this is a cough, then I can give you medicine for the cough. But if I can't identify what it is, how am I going to address it? So this is a kind of like reluctance to address a problem that is clearly a problem because the victims are not South African. And then it turns out that the victims were South Africans.
Yeah, they said the large percentage of those who were killed were South African.
And then suddenly it's like, oh my God, let's have a press conference, And that was such a powerful moment for me because it shows and proves to that there's no one face of a foreigner. There's no one face of a black person or a white, there's no barcode on my forehead that says I'm not from here. And when you see now that the harm was caused to their own, suddenly there's action.
How do you feel right now being a black female Zimbabwean living in South Africa right now?
All those women in me are tired. I'm tired. I will be honest and say that up until Uinene, I wasn't afraid to be black female living where I live because I live in Claremont. That's my post office. I wasn't as afraid because privilege buys you certain protection, right? By the spaces you occupy and people you interact with. But I could have been Uinene. So now I'm afraid. So definitely there's a layer of fear that something could happen to me. And because I'm not South African, would I be reported the same way? Would people care as much? I'm not young or as pretty. Would the media care as much? Do my friends have the same resources? Do they care about me enough to report my absence? So it's definitely something that I've asked myself. And then I think of poorer black Zimbabwean women. She can go missing any day and nobody will know. So I'm scared, I'm concerned. And like you said, each of those layers makes the experience even harder because of how the response would be if something happened to me.
So there is a question I want to ask you. You said you are Zimbabwean. How do you feel about Robert Mugabe's death?
Personally, I am Zimbabwean. I am a black woman. I am Ndebele. Those layers all inform how I feel about Robert Mugabe, and is that I don't. And in my culture, we don't speak ill about the dead. But I couldn't care less. If anything, it's unfair because he didn't get to answer for all the atrocities that he enabled and committed. Right? And when people speak about Robert Mugabe and say, oh, his first few years was when the Kukuraundi happened. I have family members that I never got to know. My father has traumatic stories. My grandfather was beaten within an inch of his life, and he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. So I don't have a period of Robert Mugabe that makes me happy, that makes me long for those days. And definitely when I was young, I didn't understand because my political activism is something that, I started my early 20s. So for me, because of the harm directly to my family, directly to my people and my heritage, the harm to my generation. There's a whole generation of Zimbabwean people who don't know what their homes look like because they're scattered across the world, because of economic policy, because of systematic exclusion, because of looting on one of the largest scales known in history. I don't know if I have. This is the most time I've actually afforded to his passing. So people do have mixed feelings. My feelings are not mixed. They're very clear. I couldn't care less.
How would you summarize your 20s journey thus far?
My 20s journey has been epic in the sense that it has all the good ingredients for like a great series on Netflix. It's been fun. It's been adventurous. It's been sad. It's required a lot of me. But ultimately, it's been the best ride of my life in that I've become who I am because of my 20s. Okay. Like, wow.
I love what you said about it being like a TV series.
Totally. Like one of those like 7 seasons long series.
Yeah,
it's great.
yeah.
Everything that you want. Heartbreak. Poor life decisions. All of it. It's there.
Don't you feel like there have been so many plot twists in the 20s that you never saw coming? With people, with places, with jobs. It's just like, I didn't know that was going to happen.
And can we stop now? I'm ready. I'm done with surprises now. Can we just like, can we level out? Can we level out now? Can we, definitely. I mean, like, I don't have the same friends I had when I was in my early 20s. I'm not in love with the same person I was, with in my early 20s. Yeah. Even like 3 years ago, I definitely was not who I am today. I love myself differently.
Yeah. Have you ever experienced the quarter life crisis?
I'm in the middle of it.
Oh, okay. Hit me. What is your quarter life crisis? What are you currently going through?
So it's definitely about being foreign. So my permit is about to expire.
Okay.
And I don't know what I want to do.
Okay.
And I am a type A high achiever person, always has a plan. Okay. And my whole life has been curated either by my parents or by me, like definitely had plans. And suddenly I don't know. And it's about, do I feel safe here? It's about, if I stay, what will I do? And I'm also kind of wanting to go back to school, but I can't afford it. How do I get back to that? Can I afford a job shift? People don't want me because of my passport. There's so many things happening that I'm so uncertain about, particularly when like next year hits. I don't know where I am. So I know I am loved, which I think is the most important thing. I've got a really great support system. My friends, my boyfriend, my family. I know I feel very secure in my relationships. But in my life's trajectory, I have no idea what's going to happen. Like, ask me next year in June who I am, and I might have a better answer. I don't know. Wow.
So my final question is, you've had quite a journey, like even in your 20s, even listening to your story, such a unique story. Such a story of hope, though. And I think that's the importance is, although and despite everything that you've been through, everything that, and even, and it just keeps coming back to me when you said you're privileged in a different way, or speaking of your privilege or the kind of privilege, because there are people who, again, like we said, we're probably speaking to people who understand this and who will, listen and be very intellectual about this conversation. But I kind of wanted to know, like, what advice do you have for people specifically who maybe have taken a similar journey to you? So what advice do you have for people who are other Africans who've moved to South Africa, who are living in South Africa right now, who are maybe going through what you are going through?
Wow. I don't know, hey. Okay. I think generally, like, the one piece of advice I would give somebody in a similar situation is say no often, in the sense that you sometimes feel like your time is running out because of your permit or whatever, and you want to say yes to everything and do more things and fill your life before you have this piece of your history taken away from you or whatever. And I made a lot of poor life decisions because of the anxiety of having to leave, you know, and the repercussions, I'm still dealing with some of them. So definitely being a foreigner means that you're living on borrowed time sometimes, and you try to fill that borrowed time with as many good memories, as many laughs, as many collectibles as possible. And you don't have to. Your life is rich already, that you left where you came from. You were brave enough to come and exist in a place that may not want you. You've made human connections. You've gotten qualifications. You've traveled. There are already so many things that you've accomplished. You don't have to say yes to everything.
And final piece of advice is just to people in their 20s in general.
Be honest. As soon as I started being honest with myself, I think, like mid-20s, like 25, 26, like brutally truthful about my lack of accountability, about how I treated people in my life, about how much work I didn't put into just being honest with yourself inculcates a culture of being honest with other people. And honesty really removes this layer of having to remember lies, you know? It means that you have people in your life who authentically want to be there because you've been honest about who you are to them. And then they choose you because they choose you because you are you. Stop wearing armor for people who don't matter. So be honest with yourself. If you don't like a guy's attention, say you don't like it. If you don't want to drink that day, don't drink. If you don't want to do something, don't do it. If you feel a certain way, say it. Honesty just makes the way you travel through your life and through the lives of other people a beautiful experience, because you're the one person they can always be certain about. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for coming onto the In My 20s podcast and sharing your personal journey and personal experience of being a woman from another African country, from Zimbabwe, living in South Africa, and how the xenophobic attacks have affected you and your viewpoints on xenophobia. I hope this conversation will allow us to engage in other conversations where we're starting to come up with solutions so we can be part of the solution and not observe this as just a problem. This was such an enlightening and engaging episode, so thank you for that. So we'll catch you all same time, same place, right here on In My 20s.